We'll go on the horse and carriages, and then we'll go line dance in the afternoon, have a lovely time. Hello, welcome to Great Yarmouth. Here's your hotel.
Thank you.
We hope you have a lovely stay. We'll take you on the horses and carriages tomorrow.
Welcome to the film Great Yarmouth. Provisional Figures, a film which competes in the official section of the 70th edition of the San Sebastian Film Festival. And to talk about the film, we've got most of the creative team. Let me introduce from left to right: FILIPA, producer; Ricardo Adolfo, a screenplay writer; RITA, CABAÇO, actress; NUNO, LOPES, actor; Marco Martins, the director of the film; BEATRIZ, BATARDA, actress; KRIS, HITCHEN, actor; ROMEU, actor; and JOÁO, RIBEIRO, DOP, director of photography. Very pleased to have you here. And perhaps, instead of opening up the floor to questions, perhaps it could be interesting that the director, Marco Martins, and FILIPA could tell us how the project of Great Yarmouth, where does the inspiration come from? I think it was being prepared for many years, it seems, from what I know. Could
projeto muito longo que ha começado
It's a long project that started
em
2017.
Na verdade,
The truth is,
final da estreia do São Jorge, eu fui convidado por uma associação que existe em Great Yarmouth chamada Sea Change.
I went, Citra is the place in Great Yarmouth. I went there to develop a project, a community theatre project with the Portuguese migrant community which exists in that city. And for me, it was completely unbeknownst to me. I had no idea it existed. So I had thought of a film upon the economic crisis in Portugal, and it was quite clear to me that those are the people who had run away from the crisis. They had no work in Portugal. There were almost 10,000 Portuguese living in there and 150,000 living in the UK. My Portuguese migration at that time, for several reasons, the biggest, the biggest destination for Portuguese immigration was in Portugal. It was in the UK. I started to work with the Portuguese migrants at that stage in 2017. 2017, I developed a theatre project, not with actors, but with the inhabitants of the city and also the workers in the factory who were already, that had the title that they appeared in the film, that is Provisional Figures. And so when I started to learn about the reality in that place and working with those people, what came into my idea was an idea of making a film about this town or city. Does anyone want to add, what interested you to get involved in the project?
Na verdade foi o Marco.
The truth was that
o guião a ler e na altura fiquei
reading the screenplay. At that time, I was quite impressed with what I read, and I felt like jumping on board on this adventure, despite the fact that I was a bit afraid because it was my first feature film, and so therefore I understood this film was going to have a very demanding dimension to it. And I also believe, first of all, I had to do it in parallel with other work that I had to do with other jobs or works that I'd been involved in with Portuguese migrants. But in this case, we wanted to portray how the Portuguese worked abroad. And that's what interested me quite a lot. That was what most attracted me. That is to say, the repercussion of my own work, or what I'd done already in the past. The truth is, I've just seen a great flick, a great movie. What a goal in football terms, what a goal. And Ken Loach couldn't have done a better job. That's quite clear to me. Undoubtedly, because great portrayals, great acting, DOP, photography, another great goal. Another great goal. It's a film
Eso sí, no he comido carne y eso me ha venido muy bien también.
I don't eat meat, and it's great. I'm not going to be eating any more meat in the future. But anyway, I'm saying this positively. I'd already got right into the film and right into the storyline, and that is something that we cinephiles always like, something that you get right into the screen and right into the story.
El compañero me ha quitado la pregunta, claro.
But my colleague has just taken my question away from me. It was a question that I was going to ask. But when you had the story and so on and so forth about making this project, what can I ask you now? Though you knew perfectly well who you were going to choose to portray the roles in this film, because KRIS HITCHEN, who works quite a lot with Ken Loach, if I'm not mistaken. Could you tell us more about that and how you selected the actors and the actresses? Okay, from the outset of constructing, shall we say, the film, we felt like working with some actors who had already worked in this play, and these were the workers in the factories in the city where they processed the turkey meat, for example. And these are I'd worked with some of them in the past. Some I'd only worked with in the play or in the theater. Like, there's an actor which I think it's his first time he plays a role in a film. Some actors, it's the first time they've worked in film. They came from the theater world or for plays. And it was a very long casting process, but the truth is there were mainly conversations about the subject matter in the film. What I thought it was important vis-a-vis Ken Loach, for there to be a character, well, the truth is violence is something which is quite complex, and for me violence comes or stems from or arises from the frustration. Nobody is born violent, or we become violent when we don't manage to achieve what we want. When something is not given to us that we want, it's an animal reaction to frustration, for me. And that is why when I saw Ken Loach's film, I saw the character who was extremely kind and vulnerable, and I thought it was interesting that this character could be a bit more violent, transformed by the system itself. As it happens to all of the people and all the characters that are in there, these are characters who are deformed, so to speak, and effectively, morally speaking, through this place which is a factory at the end of the day. It's a factory which ends up transforming people and eats them up. Over here. Congratulations. My Portuguese, I can mix, well, I speak a bit of Spanish and Portuguese.
Parabéns, não somente para a questão que indicou o companheiro, pero também para
for things that my colleague has said, and also to have the courage teaching a migration, European migration of our country in Europe, as we call the pigs. Quite obvious. This word indicates the treatment with us, and there's it ends up making us second division or second degree citizens, and it's a tip of the iceberg of a situation which goes way beyond the migration. Migration normally is a global issue, but you had the courage of showing it, and that it's much more than this, and that's why I want to congratulate you. My question is just exactly that. That is what was the reaction? How do you believe or are there any indicators that this film
un motor
may be a driving force
llevar l'attenzione
to draw attention of the European context that exists
a certo livello europeos de primera e segunda?
of first and second grade, shall we say, citizens, I think he's saying.
Sim, a mim parece-me que
It seems to me that film and art currently today play a key role in this sort of dictatorship of images and information that we live in, because it continues to be a free space in order to address the most pertinent questions. It's a space for creation. Perhaps it's the last one, not only in cinema or in film, but all types of art. So therefore I believe that the film not only draws attention to a reality, which is a consequence of successive crises that we've had in the last few years, of the advance of neoliberal policies and this mass number of workers that move from one country to another. Because I was interested in this, because these are the people that didn't have work in Portugal, so they were prepared to accept those working conditions, that contract that they talk about in the film. So they have no real conditions. It's almost a pre-industrial revolution type of working conditions. There's no labor link to them. And for example, some people were truly needed. Not only did they do the regular shift, but they also did overtime. We know there were people who were working 16 hours a day within those factories, or for example, in the cleaning services. That is done with highly toxic products, and they had problems, serious health problems, and they have no insurance, and they have no protection at all. So I also believe that that's the situation and the reality of these Portuguese people that live there, but obviously it's not an exclusive reality in England. This is what I decided to talk about. It was a place where they invited me to work and to be able to talk about these people where I spent 5 years. But it's not exclusive there. It's a European problem. So, for example, when they tell us that Germany needs 2 million migrants, labor at present, well, we ask ourselves, how are these people, what's going to be their role in of these people in society when they get there, with the European population aging as it does? This is going to be more an issue that we're going to have to address more seriously, I believe. We have a large part of the cast of the film, and before we were talking about the actors, I'd like the actors that we got here could please tell us what the experience was of making this film, because there are professional actors, but there are also actors that are not so, and from what I understand. So how did this interaction take place? It'd be interesting to listen to what they have to say. I don't know who wants to break the ice. Nuno or Beatriz or whoever. Well, this, myself as well as Beatriz, we worked and we helped Marco when he was preparing the film, working with these new actors in order to make this film. And that was, well, at least in my case, it was my first contact with this reality and with these people that subsequently, some of them did form part of the film and this story, and it allowed me and helped me well, it was good for me to help to get to know what would be the future of Carlos, my character, whether he stays in England or not. So that was the first contact I had, and it was very important, and that's where we did this work. And so therefore it was also very important for me to maintain that contact with these people, with the region, and with racism as well, because I remember the first time I arrived there to this city, leaving the taxi to walk into the hotel for the first time. I remember I was paying the taxi driver and I said, "You're Portuguese?" And I said, "Yes." "Are you coming here for tourism to work?" I said, "To work." And he said to me,
esse foi o meu primeiro contacto com um problema que existe.
Well, I had a problem with what he said. He said, good luck, but that was my first contact.
Foi dos sítios que
And it appears in the film because that's what exists and that's what happens in that region. It's in areas which is more in favor of Brexit. And I also think this is reflected in the film as well.
e estávamos em altura de pré-Brexit, na altura em que começámos a fazer a peça, se não me engano.
We were in pre-Brexit, I think, when we made the film. Is that correct? If I'm not mistaken, yes. And that was the first contact I had with.
Ficou-nos nas veias e ajudou-nos
And that got
a criar.
that feeling helped us very much to create the whole film. And then subsequently, during the shooting of the film, that was in the pandemic, and I think it influenced the shooting of the film very much. It influenced us, the characters as well, the way in
É a
which...
primeira vez que eu vejo o filme, portanto, isto não é uma
Well, it's the first time I've seen the film, by the way. So therefore, I'm talking straight. Well, when I was watching the film, seeing the film, or watching the film, I feel that the film is like a nightmare, and that nightmare is what we live through. The truth be said, not only the subject matter, but the shoot itself was a nightmare, and the conditions, the tough conditions we were in. We had to stop shooting halfway through, and that formed part of the creation of these characters, I believe. Well, okay, I don't want to go on any longer, but
Contextualizar,
to contextualize the things, the shoot started in March in 2020,
continuámos a rodar durante
and we continued to shoot for 3 weeks.
avião de Inglaterra para Portugal.
Well, we took the last flight from England to Portugal, and then the shoot was interrupted for 6 months.
Estávamos,
And when we came back,
foi das primeiras rodagens a começar com todas as condicionantes.
we were one of the first shoots that started to work with all of the conditions, conditioning factors through the pandemic, and to shoot in that situation of films in that situation, it was almost general paranoia, wasn't it, during the shoot?
¿También añadir algo?
Sí, ¿qué quieres saber?
La experiencia.
What was your
¿Cómo
experience?
sentisteis vosotras esta experiencia?
Tanta coisa para dizer, não é?
Well, there's so many things I could say. I'm not too sure where to start.
Penso que não sei se por conta
I think, I'm not sure that due to the pandemic or whether it's a movement which has been announced further back, but I've got the feeling we're seeing a great transformation here in Europe, politically speaking. Yes, I think so. Politically, I think there's an enormous movement that's taking place. And in the last few years, I've felt that if we have to do something in the world of art, it's got to be something that's worthwhile, that it's got to have some meaning behind it, that it can do say something that it can contribute to this transformation for a better world, for a better relationship with nature and our planet, and for our well-being, for us, that is, say, as people, that it was more and more present. And perhaps it's fair and just to say that the preparation of this film, this awareness was always quite present. I was also a migrant in England when I was very young. I went to study and then I stayed there and I lived there, but things didn't go well. The artistic career didn't work very well initially there, and then at the end I ended up doing other type of work, a dignified work. I had never been in contact with this loss of human dignity as we see, for example, in this film, and it was tough to accept the impact that this awareness caused in me or provoked in me, and I was very reluctant, and I was very to be in this place, and Marco, like a good Rottweiler as he is, didn't allow me to. What this had happened to me in other films, to have the awareness of what I was doing, and with that awareness, reject the place that the film obliged me to be in order to shoot it. And so therefore, And what I used as a way of entering into my character, but also to save myself from the character, this constant reference to the smell of all of everything, the blood and everything that could be repulsive, and it also can create a certain type of vice. And in that play of tension that exists there between it being repugnant and all the shit that was there and all of the blood, what I worked upon was, because all of the actors who work in the factory or have any contact with the factory in the film also had who had worked and who worked in the abattoir of these turkeys, as we see in the film. And I think that this film, this period, although it wasn't a long time, was of fundamental importance or key importance in the transformation and the creation of these characters. Quite often, I think that I don't work, I don't have a method when I work, I hope not anyways, but all of the physical work, all the physical experience behind it is more important than any work upon the psychology of the people. And I think Tanya's character, there were many things that we discovered during that period, I think, during the shoot of the film. For me, that experience that Marco gave me was quite complete, because I knew Marco only because I worked in the theatre with him, and he invited me to participate in this film, and I had the opportunity to go to this city only a week before to investigate it and to document myself, and therefore I was there on my own. And I discovered myself trying to find Portuguese people in the street and following them wherever they went, like a spy, and to follow them and to see what the conversations they held. And it was very enriching for me, because to get to know that reality, to get to know those people and to be able to talk about them. And as Marco said, and I agree, that art has this power of demonstrating and showing the world that it's very important to talk, and to talk in public. And we artists, that we can talk about something that it's important to talk, that a subject that's important to talk about. And as an actress, this was all for a person as a person and as an actress, because I learnt that in films, and because I've had I've not had too many opportunities in film, but I've learnt that the most important thing is to learn to confide and put your trust in someone, and mainly in a film like this, in which the protagonists, in my opinion, are the people who live there. They are the migrants who are there and live there. And vis-a-vis that circumstance, being an actress in this film was to exist, to be there by their side, next to them, and confide and put my trust. And that was in the fact that that would be sufficient. I know it might sound something that's quite evident, but the truth is, it's very difficult to do this for an actor or an actress. So therefore, I'm still in that process of learning to put my trust and to be present with my colleagues, and who I want to thank the generosity they had with me. And it was an enormous pleasure to have this experience of being with all of you and working and seeing how you all work. Marco, thank you very much.
Sorry. Yeah, it was a great opportunity to work with. Let me unplug them things, otherwise I'm going to hear them in another language. It was a great opportunity to work with people from a different country, culture, language. So it was a real challenge, and to work on subject matter that I knew absolutely nothing about. So yeah, it was challenging. It was challenging because of lockdown, the conditions that we were in, the fact that we'd already started shooting, and then we ended up having to break and then come back, and then the script had changed. So there was all these things that came into it. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I'm not as used to Marco as you and NUNO are. Even though we were locked down at the time, I have to say that if it wasn't for ROMEU and us being able to get beer deliveries from Iceland, we'd have been, well, we'd have had a terrible time, let's put it that way. But yeah, I was glad when it ended because I suddenly stopped being alcoholic. So, and I have to thank Marco.
Gin and tonics helped.
No, your gin and tonics were weak. But yeah, NUNO said to me at the time, he said, even though you'll have a love-hate relationship with Marco, when you've finished, you know, he's making you stronger, he's building you, he's breaking you, and all those challenges that you face, ultimately they'll help you in the future. So when you finish shooting, you'll probably thank him. So. Does anyone else want to talk? No, I'm joking. No, it is true. Yeah, every job I've been on since, I don't know, it's just felt a lot easier because when you go through something like this with these people, it makes you a little bit stronger. So there you go. To you, pal.
Well, I'm going to be short. I think my colleagues already said a lot that I agree. I just want to thank you, all of you, to being able to live such an experience as an actor that I thought that I would never experience in my life. It was with a big joy and a warmed heart that I received all your indications and suggestions and a full experience that you all have as actors. And the work with Marco, it's always very demanding. It's always very looking for truth in that moment, where you have no escape all the time as an interpreter or as an actor, and you're forced to, even on, I believe that it's on your weakest moments, and I don't know why am I talking English.
I've just noticed that. It's because I'm here. No, seriously. When we were filming, whenever I was there, we just start talking English.
Mas eu acho que é nos momentos mais...
No, you have to
Now I continue in English. It's an international festival, so...
do it.
I just want to say that I speak English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and a little bit of Italian.
And you can dance.
But I believe that it's on your most fragile moments that you discover your real strength as a human being and also as an actor or as an interpreter. And I think this is a condition that for me stimulates me a lot to work with a director like Marco, constantly being on the edge of the abyss. With this huge passion to evoke a huge team that suffered so many consequences, to change the plan, not changing the plan. I think when we were more close to those immigrants is when the pandemic appeared and we had to stop, and we didn't know also how our future was going to be, not only for the movie but for all of us. And I think that when we came back, there was this weight in all of us, this experience of not knowing how it's going to be. Then everybody had to pass time with their families, no work, no perspective of future. And I think this was for me when I came back, when then was like an intense journey to finish the movie. And I think all this dimension, this tension, this urgency to live and to want to become alive again. Also, it was there in all the team, also the production, and I think we all carried a huge swan on top of this swamp that was this landscape, human landscape where we were living, that was Great Yarmouth. So I think I had enough of English. And so I would just want to thank you all, and especially to Marco to give me this opportunity to pretend that I'm an actor.
For me, there's a thing that it's very important working with actors, especialmente num projeto como este, que é esta ideia do ator, todas as escolhas que o ator faz,
Yes.
políticas, e portanto não é só quando nós estamos
Not
a
only
representar
by presenting a woman, or
é quando nós estamos a representar também
when we presented them to Great Yarmouth, and that
pronto, isso é um trabalho
requires work vis-a-vis a director, which makes
num sítio
it abovely all in a place.
que seja uma escolha acima de tudo consciente.
And we were not aware. Well, okay, it was quite difficult, and films like these are essential
Trabalho seja feito junto
that the work be done
das pessoas que nós estamos a representar.
as a choral, along with the people who we are representing at the same time. Each deals with issues of risk. Run the risk of not representing this situation in the correct manner, if you catch what I'm saying. The question, the Portuguese community in Great Yarmouth, is a community which is completely isolated. There's no integration, is that right? And whether this is the reason, it's the reason of the film that it leaves nothing to hope. It seems that there's no future at the end of the film. And finally, what did the taxi driver tell the protagonist that I didn't understand when he got to the city? See, what happened to me? What did he say? It wasn't translated. The question is, at the end of the day, whether the community, there's no integration, or whether they live, these 10,000 Portuguese people who live in the city, they don't integrate, or are they isolated, or what's the story there? And whether that's everything that's so tough, for example, the film doesn't show that there's any possibility of hope. The immigration and the type of work they carry out, these people do work which is very tough, and above all has to do with leave very early in the morning, work all day, and go back at night. So in that case, they're almost like ghosts in a city which itself is a ghost town, because most of the time is desert. It is deserted, and it was abandoned as a spa, because it was an area which was used as a spa. It was well known, and that the working class in the 1940s, the English working class, went there for on holidays, but slowly but surely it entered into decadence. And there is a type of English dream of the people who go there, the idea of hope and trying to become English in a certain way. And so therefore, for these people, there was a very complicated process, because at the beginning, these people didn't want to talk about what their life was like in England, because there's a projection, shall we say, of these people about what their subsequent life is, which doesn't correspond really, or the working in the factories, for example. That they don't assume the work and the toughness of the work that they have to carry out. So there's always a marginal aspect, almost underworld, underground, which is how these Portuguese have lived. And this has happened since 2009, when this migration started. There are a series of Portuguese prior or pre-Brexit who have worked, all of them work more or less in the same factories. These factories have changed, and the working conditions also changed. For example, the main employer in the region, for example, was loved by the Portuguese. They offered them food, good working conditions, so therefore they were normal, quote-unquote, jobs, employment, normal employment, shall we say, regular employment. It's interesting to talk about this because it seems that in these times there's not only employment, there's just jobs, and so therefore they had employment, shall we say. But the people who arrived in 2009 were able to create roots in the city. For example, when I went there was an association of Portuguese workers and they had some backing, but that disappeared. And at present, a year ago, there wasn't any organized Portuguese association, but there were a series of Portuguese of that time who had cafeterias, hairdressers, markets with Portuguese food, Portuguese products, and it's in a street which is not it's not a marginal street, it's a parallel street to the high street, I think he's trying to say. And which has changed the city to a certain extent. And due to the immigrants or the migrants, when I arrived in 2017, I was invited to visit the city for the first time. I was quite impressed with what happened to it, which is the following. The idea that has to do with what we're talking about, the role of art. For the most Portuguese, this reality was absolutely unknown to them. And when I started to work in the film, I discovered that there were many people for some periods and certain periods that have gone back to Portugal. Taking advantage of we got Ricardo and JOÁO, who's the DOP and the screenplay writer. Nuno said something, it's interesting, there was a bit of a nightmare in everything that was surrounded. Visually, I think the film shows this a bit. Perhaps it's interesting that you could ask how you visually treated the film. And Ricardo, the screenplay writer, please, how did you construct the script? It was done with real testimonies of migrants, albeit it's fiction, but it's based upon true events or true statements. Thank you. I met a DOP. Well, for me, I would say, my great concern was to enter into the mind of the director who I'm working with, and in this case, the head of Marco. And that was an enormous challenge because, but nevertheless, I think that our work, with all the actors, with the production team, and with the makeup team as well, that is to say, was essentially to construct a film in which we can see that everything happened within in a cul-de-sac. For example, it was dark, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes it seemed that it went downhill diagonally, and it could have been a horrible spiral, what you see. And also, on location, we try to visually we want those situation of a certain limitation. For example, the marshlands, for example, there's a general shot or take, but there's a wall of grass or reeds, and that idea of being like a claustrophobic situation, and that's how we constructed the film from the photography standpoint of view. I think that the screenplay had a great advantage to it because there's initial research had been done, which was fantastic, by the way, quite honest and quite rich. So therefore, there was a lot of that initial investigation which has entered into the film and has brought about a great sense of reality to the script or to the screenplay. So as of there, we had to be aware so that we could reflect that truth there. And during this period, which was almost 5 years, I've always asked this to myself, why are we making this story? Why are we telling it? We could have done another different story. And when Brexit emerged, I read an article which talked about the lack of turkey that there was for Christmas in England. And my God, I said, talk about a lack of turkeys. Why they should the lack of human condition, this lack of respect that exists in Europe. I'm a migrant. I've always been a migrant, so therefore it's a problem that I think is very important to address. But the English press were only worried about their bloody turkeys, so I thought that this story had to be told one way or another, because these types of concerns just couldn't be that this could happen.
I was answering in English because I changed the language in the middle and it doesn't work, I think. So when I arrived to Great Yarmouth for the first time to work on the play before the film, I left the train and get a cab to my hotel, and as I was arriving to the hotel, the taxi driver asked me, so are you Portuguese? And I said yes, because he heard me talking on the phone. And I said yes. And he said, so as I was paying him, he asked me, so you're here to work or tourism? And I said, work. And he said, oh, another one joins the circus. And that was my first reaction to arriving to Great Yarmouth.
Una última pregunta allí, porque tenemos que ir terminando.
También la película, quiero decir que es una película que...
I think it's a film which is quite grim, is it? It's quite dark and gloomy, and it has a theatrical magnet. You can almost smell the blood, you can almost smell the dirty, all of the dirty elements, but it attracts you, doesn't it? And you also combine, and this is for the director as well, interior and exterior shots, inside and outside shots, if you're saying. And those corridors are also, and the use of colors, I think, that's very well done. But I've always heard that the work in corridors or places that are very narrow are not easy to shoot, and that's the question I wanted to ask.
Penso que o João já falou bocadinho
Well, João has already talked about the work in constructing the universe of this film. When I think about the architecture and the structure of a film, I always imagine as a mental universe. Well, in this case, it's a nightmare, but it's a mental universe, if you catch what I'm saying. We look at this city or this territory, we look at these factories through the gaze of someone. And there existed that idea of a universe which simultaneously, as João said, which was claustrophobic, but it was also almost labyrinthic, that is, like a maze, as if we couldn't get out of there. Or make it out of there, it's like a hamster running around in his cage and moving and moving and moving on his. And so therefore, and that's how we constructed this relationship. But I believe that we Western people, we Europeans, there's an aspect which marked the film quite a lot, and that is that we see the house or the bed as a place of comfort. The word house, that doesn't exist in this film. There are buildings and there are rooms, but not specifically a house. So therefore, this hostility and this coldness, and this city is a place which is quite violent, because the way of establishing affection is something which is quite complex. It's arid, which stems from how brutal the work that the majority of these people are carrying out. And so therefore, This is what existed in the construction of all the imaginary side of the film. That's the idea. And then the actors have already talked quite a lot. There was a moment in which this city, which was sick, really was ill, and there's an aspect like a constant conspiration. It has a big percentage of pro-Brexit voters, and it has one of the highest unemployment rates in England, so therefore it's not contradictory at all. It has to do with that frustration that exists, that we were talking about, which generates violence and so on. And that is why the dehumanization, shall we say, of the people who almost seem to be like ghost-like was quite present in the construction of the film. All of this came from a universe which was absolutely realist, and through the interviews with the people. And this brought about a reflection, a greater reflection, I believe, subsequently, about the place itself and the place we occupy in the mental chain. But obviously the pandemic reinforced this or strengthened this, because there was a given time where we also move in what's dark, or we were also shadows. We were working and we lived living in rooms. We couldn't leave it, we couldn't socialize, so therefore we were in a situation which was very similar in physical terms due to the pandemic to what we were trying to deal with in the film. And this is quite present in the entire film. In all of the work of the actors, because we only left our rooms to shoot and then we went back to our rooms. Okay, we have to finish here. I just would like to thank the team of the film for having coming to San Sebastian to present it, and wish you the best of luck in the future with the film. Thank you.